Kevin Randall.
I am here.
Hey, welcome to the Edge television broadcast, Kevin.
Well, thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Well, man, so glad to have you on. Dr. Randall, you have been on so many programs, and I was thinking, the way our show goes, a lot of times we get what's called guest suggestions, what our viewers want to, the interview they want to hear or see, and your name came up several times, so I said, man, I got to get Kevin Randall on the program.
And I'm glad it came up.
Right. That means a couple things. One, you're still alive. Two,
yes.
People want to hear what you have to say.
Yes.
And man, I tell you what, you're keeping them occupied too, because you are a prolific writer. We're going to be talking about a couple of your latest books, and I think you've got a book in the works. But Dr. Kevin Randall, before we get going, why don't you give a little bit of history to our audience? I know you've probably done this hundreds of times, but this is a whole new audience for you. So just introduce yourself to the Edge broadcast audience.
You mean I didn't drag some of my old friends along to listen to the show?
Well, they're out there. You know that.
For those who don't know, I am a retired military officer. I retired as a lieutenant colonel. I served as a helicopter pilot in Vietnam and a battalion intelligence officer in Iraq. I've been studying UFOs for practically my entire life. Started when my mother took me to a science fiction movie. She was always very interested in science fiction, which was aliens and visitation and civilizations throughout the galaxy. And, of course, UFOs kind of fit into that. So she kind of sparked my interest, and I've been studying the UFOs since I was a teenager. So I've been around quite a while, a lot longer than I care to admit. Have written a number of books about it, have gotten involved in some controversies about it, and I try to bring a level of dispassion to the study of UFOs, rather than wanting to prove they're real or disprove that they don't, or disprove they don't exist. I want to look at the evidence and see where that takes me and draw my conclusions based on the evidence. So that's kind of a short synopsis of what I've been doing.
Now, how long were you in the military?
I retired. Well, there's a question that's almost impossible to answer. I retired with 22 years of service, credited for retirement, but there were a number of years. For example, when I was taking ROTC at the University of Iowa, you get credit for pay purposes, but not for retirement purposes for doing that. And there were some years when I was in the inactive reserve, and some years I was in the reserve and the National Guard. So all told, it worked out to about 33 years of service, but only 22 that counted for retirement.
All right. Well, concerning your military service, now, did your interest in UFO occur after or during your stint?
Oh, it preceded it. As I say, my mother got me interested when I was growing up in the movie she took me to was Earth versus the Flying Saucers, for those of you who really want to know. Mm-hmm. And that came out, I think, in like 1956 or something. So that sparked my interest, but I was a child at the time. While I was in Vietnam, for example, my mother and my grandmother sent me some books on UFOs because they knew of my interest. And when I got to Iraq, everybody knew of my interest in UFOs. And I'd done a number of UFO documentaries for various programs. And while we were in Iraq, a couple of sergeants came up to me one day and wanted to know if I had a younger brother. And I said, "What do you mean?" And they said, "Well, we were watching this documentary." And this is what's silly about Iraq, with satellite TV, they were watching the History Channel and all these kinds of things. And they said, "We saw a guy on there and he had the same last name and he looked an awful lot like you. And we just wondered if that might have been your brother." And I said, "No, that was probably me a number of years ago." So I've been around for a long time doing this, been on lots of documentaries, done lots of radio shows and television programs, and had one of my books turned into the movie Roswell, which was a Showtime original film. Oh my goodness, more than 20 years ago now. So there you go.
So what was your first book concerning UFOs?
I had done a lot of articles for magazines. Back in the 1970s, there were like 6-7 magazines that published regularly, and some of them were publishing like 9 times a year or 6 times a year. So there was a lot of need for material. So I was writing a lot of magazine articles, and I finally collected a lot of those into a book called the UFO Casebook, which came out in 1989, and that was the first book that I had done, but I'd done a lot of articles prior to that. And then from that point on, I got dragged into the Roswell investigation by the Center for UFO Studies. Don Schmidt specifically asked me to assist in their investigation because they thought that my military background would be important to them simply because we would be dealing with a lot of military people and I might have a connection on a level that they, as civilians or former, or as never having served in the military, might not have. And so they asked me if I would participate in their Roswell investigation. And out of that grew a couple books, and from that, more books followed along. So Brad Steiger and I argue about who has written the most UFO books. He thinks it's me. I think it's him. But Nick Redfern's making a real run at us. So it may be Nick Redfern not very long.
Hey, wait a minute. Now, I think, no, it's Nick Pope, I think, one of those is in Indiana right now doing a UFO conference. Hey, are you familiar with the Ramseys?
Yes.
Because I noticed that right on the homepage of your a different perspective blog spot, it has that welcome to Aztec. Now, did you visit that little town there?
I did. That picture was taken by Paul Kimball. I visited the town, and I didn't get any dynamic pictures like that when I was there. I took some pictures out in the countryside in the Hart Canyon area and that sort of thing, which is, you could be just about anywhere in northern New Mexico and those pictures would be there. But yes, I've been to Aztec. I've looked around. I've looked at this case for quite a while. So, and I'm familiar with their work. Yes.
Now, do you receive UFO reports or sightings?
Periodically, people will send me something. Normally, what I get are queries about specific events and what my take on them might be. The one I remember that really upset a number of people was about the Travis Walton abduction. And I had said at the point that I'm just not convinced that the abductions have an extraterrestrial component to them. Although, if I was to guess on how abductions were taking place, I would be more inclined to believe something like the Walton abduction or the Hill abduction, as opposed to these ongoing things where people are taking out of their bedrooms repeatedly for continued experimentation. So that didn't make the people happy. And I think one of the problems is people want, when they ask questions like that, they don't want me to say, well, yeah, I'm a little bit worried about some of that evidence. They want me to say, yes, this case is true or that case is true, to kind of validate their own belief structure. And, I look at these sorts of things and I try to analyze them as best I can and come to a conclusion whether or not it would be an alien visitation or some kind of a mundane explanation. I try to go where the evidence leads me on those cases.
So have you ever had to explain to somebody what they really saw was some headlights going through a fog?
I have explained some cases to people and didn't make them happy. There was a case in Mount Vernon, Iowa in the 1970s, and it got a lot of play in Iowa. And it was a couple out near the Kepler Palisades Park, and they saw a number of lights sort of drifting down from the sky and disappearing behind the woods. And the female there, she within a week was drawing pictures of what it looked like as a dome disk, and later she was drawing pictures of the dome disk with two creatures, shadows, seen through it. The guy said, no, we just saw lights. We didn't see anything spectacular. So I went out to the area where they had been, and I was watching the sky about the same time at night, and I saw the same phenomenon. What they were looking at were landing lights at the airport. And with the wind blowing the certain direction, they wouldn't have heard the sound, and what they were probably seeing were more private planes, general aviation, as opposed to commercial airliners. The police had said to them, well, we checked and there were no commercial flights scheduled in at the time. Well, that doesn't mean the airport was closed if there wasn't airplanes landing. So I was pretty sure that they had seen landing lights from the airplane. She was absolutely convinced she'd seen a dome disk. And I on my blog, there's the story is on there, and it shows the evolution of the drawings, how it goes from them showing this sort of starlight, bright lights coming down to eventually she's got the dome disk, and eventually she's got the occupants in it. So you can see the evolution of her thinking on that. And I, quick to point out, she's not lying. She clearly believed that, and as she thought about it, she sort of confabulated these memories. So she's not lying about what she saw, but I'm pretty sure that the explanation is landing lights. She wasn't enthused with my explanation, and a number of people, some of them took it as an assault on feminism for some reason, saying, well, you guys were just beating up on her because she was a little female and you were going to impress your thoughts on her about what she had seen and not listening to what she had said. And I'm thinking that has nothing to do with feminism or anything like that. What it has to do with is what the evidence is and what they had seen. I mean, I saw the same thing. What I saw was exactly what they described on the first night.
Well, I guess the pictures were probably pretty impressive until they saw one of the occupants with an iPad, and then the story probably began to break down.
Well, you know, to the aliens, the iPad is old technology.
It has to be.
Yeah, they've got something much fancier than that, and I wished I knew what it was.
Well, you know, hey, by the way, speaking of that, airplane lights. My son had his cell phone camera going, and around where we live in Greenfield, Indiana, he caught a swarm of UFOs. They were lining up. There were about 15 of them. And when I put the video out there that he sent me off the phone, people said, well, that's clearly FedEx planes. Well, the problem is FedEx doesn't fly in this area because it's just a small little airport around, and they don't line up in the shape of a V that I know of. But the shape of a V, Dr. Randall, comes up many times in the description of UFO flyover. Certainly the Phoenix lights is like that. There's even a moon picture with some sort of V-shaped illuminated object. Have you, in your research, do they come more in the V shape, or or cylindrical, or the pulsating lights? What's the majority of the UFOs that's out there?
It's all over the board. It's really what you happen to see. The Lubbock lights, going back to 1951, there's 4 pictures taken of these lights that flew over Lubbock, Texas, in a V formation, and there is absolutely no explanation. Taken by a fellow named Carl Hart, and at the time he was a 19-year-old college student. I talked to him in 1994, 95, sometime in there. I happened to be in Phoenix for some reason. I don't know, but I don't remember why I was in Phoenix. And I just, on a lark, looked him up in the phone book, and his name was there. So I called him to see what he had to say. And he said even after all these years, he doesn't know what he had photographed. And the point is, he was a 19-year-old kid, and we have seen in the past that about 99% of the photographs are taken by teenage boys, and 99% of those are faked, and he's sort of the exception that proves a rule. He doesn't know what he photographed, and it clearly is not any of the explanations that were offered. He photographed some anomalous phenomenon. It looked like lights flying over the Lubbock area at the time. Mm-hmm. But it really kind of runs in, I guess, patterns, or it runs in cycles, because an awful lot of the time in the earlier times, the late 40s, the early 50s, that time you were seeing domed discs and that kind of thing. And then there were other times you were seeing cigar-shaped craft. Charles Whitted saw cigar-shaped craft in 1948. So you've got an awful lot of those things going. The V formations, formations of the lights have come in a lot of different patterns around there, some flying in trails, some offset from one another, some in what we would call a heavy right or a heavy left formation, or an echelon formation, many in the V-shaped formation. It's in the late 80s, beginning, I think, late 80s, from that point on, we are getting triangular-shaped craft. And the lights on them would, of course, be in a V-type formation if you see the lights. And when you talk about the Phoenix lights, the really interesting sightings are the ones where they didn't really see lights, but they saw the shape of the object as it passed overhead.
Right, and wasn't that the same thing with the Stevensville?
Stevensville, I don't remember if they were talking specifically about V-shaped objects or triangular-shaped objects. I do know in the Phoenix lights phenomenon, when they started the sightings around Tucson, moving up toward Phoenix and out west beyond Phoenix, they were talking about a triangular-shaped craft. Mm-hmm. Some of the lights that were seen over Phoenix were clearly the military flares that people talk about, mm-hmm. but at the same time, there was a number of really good sightings from that area that are virtually inexplicable in today's environment.
The evolution of UFO sightings, some claim that the description of UFO sightings are evolving right along with the movies. For instance, they were the cylindrical saucer-shaped crafts were sort of in the 50s, but now you have the stealth bomber and sort of the V, and there's a flying wing for one in the late 60s, and now you have the stealth bomber. These are V-shaped objects. Is there any correlation of the advancement of the description of UFOs and the observations of them?
Well, if you look back in the history of aviation, you'll see what they called tailless aircraft beginning in 1908. Northrop had a contract to create a long-range bomber, and that was the flying wing from the late 1940s. First flew, I think the mock-up, which was called the N9M, flew in 1946, or last flew in 1946. Then they went to a 4-engine propeller job that they flew, and then that became a jet aircraft. But the problem was this stability. The flying wing was inherently unstable and would tend to flip, and that was what killed Captain Glenn Edwards. And Edwards Air Force Base was named for him in a flying wing crash. So until we got fly-by-wire, the computer to kind of stabilize the aircraft, they didn't work really well. Now we've got into that. So you've had the flying wing craft out there forever. So that really doesn't figure into the evolution of the sightings. And the other thing you have to remember, if you talk about the evolution, you have to wonder if one alien race can visit us, wouldn't there be others that might also be visiting us? And if that's the case, would their craft necessarily look like everybody else's? So the evolution that we perceive may be nothing more than other alien visitation. If you look at the aircraft carrier as just a sort of a analogy, and talk about like motherships arriving at Earth. If you look at the aircraft carrier, you've got a lot of different airplanes and aircraft that fly off that thing, from jets, jet fighter planes, to transport planes, to helicopters.
Yeah.
And so you'd have a variety of different shapes and sizes and speeds and everything else. And if you've got some kind of craft that travels interstellar distances, what's to say that you do not have some kind of shuttlecraft that land on the planet so you can gather samples or whatever the hell you want to grab from there. So that might explain this perceived evolution. The one thing I have noticed is in the beginning, in the 1940s, when you talked about occupants, they normally had some kind of spacesuit on them with helmets and all of that sort of thing. And as we move away from the 40s into the 50s and 60s, we start seeing the alien creatures outside their craft without any kind of breathing apparatus or any kind of spacesuit. Mm-hmm. So there is an evolution that I have seen.
Yeah. Now, somebody in our live chat was starting to point out that Bill Clinton may have seen a cigar-shaped craft, but then they said, no, that was a cigar-shaped craft in the Oval Office, and it was docking with the Lewinsky spaceport. So I don't know that's the kind of craft we're talking about there.
Well, I would like to point out, how would you like to be her father and have all these people making jokes like that about her?
You know what? I haven't even seen her family. Is she? And she's coming back in the news too, so we'll find out. All right, let's get to this question here for you, Doctor. This is from Doctor in our live chat. Are you related to the UFO expert Jenny Randles?
No, she spells her name with an S, and I do not.
Well, there you go. Should have just caught that right off. But I want to give the question for the listener.
That has come up before, and people looking at that stuff just don't see the nuances. That was something I noticed right away, and I can trace my family history back quite a ways, and she does not pop up in our genealogy.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have this question now. It says, this is related to your history. In the South Vietnam Air Force, did you or any others, were you there when Saigon fell?
No.
Okay.
When I left, we were winning.
And
that's what most of us say. When I was there, we were winning. Uh-huh. And it was only after the politicians dealt away the winning cards at Paris peace talks that things went bad. And Saigon fell after the United States had pulled out anyway.
Now, since then, has the U.S. won any war?
I think they did pretty well in Gulf War I, stomped the snot out of Saddam Hussein in 5 days.
All right. Good.
And we did pretty well in Iraq until politicians started messing with what was going on.
Mm-hmm. Well, hey, since we're going there a little bit, what's your views on Benghazi? Unrelated topic.
I suspect that heads should have rolled over that We did not do a very good job of protecting our citizens.
Okay. All right. Now we have a question from Stephen Woodruff. It says, do you know of Gary Bates' book, Alien Intrusion?
No, I do not.
He goes on to say, he describes UFO as interdimensional rather than from other planets. So where do you come down on that? Is it a combination of interdimensional, or are they literal physical craft from stationary planets?
I think if we are being visited, we're being visited by creatures from other planets, probably close to our planet, meaning the stars closest to our solar system are probably the most likely candidates, simply because when you start moving farther away, the distances become so vast and you just wonder about the dynamics of, like, getting across the galaxy, for example. If I was to rank it, I would say that I am fairly well convinced that the alien visitation would be from other planets. There is a possibility that there's some kind of interdimensional thing going on there. I don't rate that very highly, and even less highly than that, I would say, well, there's talk about it being time travelers, people from our future coming back for whatever reason, maybe to study the way things are going around here. But I think the most likely explanation, when you weed out all the mundane explanations that have kind of cluttered up the landscape, and when you get away from all the political aspects of it, that the most likely explanation would be alien visitation from other worlds.
So do you leave room for the possibility of interdimensional travel?
Absolutely. I leave room for time traveler, but I don't think those are the most likely explanations. So, I mean, you given what we know, which is very little, and given the evidence we have, we can't really rule out something specifically because we don't have enough information to rule it out. You just have to look at it as, the probability is alien creatures from other planets in our dimension, but we have physicists talking about multiverses. So it could be somebody coming from another universe into ours for whatever reason, or interdimensional beings, or any number of different things. But as I say, the most likely explanation would be aliens from other worlds, as opposed to aliens from other dimensions or time travelers or something of that nature.
Okay. All right. Now, have you ever had a chance to meet Edgar Mitchell?
I met him one time, and I've of course seen a lot of what he has said, and he's got it on all of us because he grew up in Roswell, so he wins on that one.
Yeah. We had him on the show. But basically, I mean, he was basically coming out saying that when he was at the program at NASA, that you weren't allowed to say the things that you saw unless you get kicked out. And I just asked him flat out, were you ever concerned that even later in life, as you're revealing what you really did see, would they come after you? And he said no. He said, because I'm old enough to where it really doesn't matter. All right,
and they have to be careful. They have to be careful because if you go after somebody like Edward Mitchell for talking about UFOs and what he might have seen, then by extension you are verifying that he is telling the truth.
There you go. All right, let's get on to this. Now, we've got the previous questions were coming from our live chat, and these questions here we'll get to is from our Fast Blast. It's an email client that people send questions through for you, Doctor. And here's one from Ron. He says, going back to your earlier comments on the Travis Walton case, evidently Travis may have passed polygraph tests more than once by different experts. Doesn't this add credence to his story?
He also flunked the first one he took.
Okay.
So you have to look at all of that, and you have to understand the polygraph is not completely and totally reliable, because if it was, then we wouldn't have trial by jury, we'd have trial by polygraph. So the results are frequently unreliable, and it depends on which study you read about how reliable they are, anywhere from only 50% up to 90%. But the point simply is Walton did take 3 polygraphs. The first one he flunked, the second one he did not, and the third one that was arranged in the 1990s by, and I can't remember his first name, guy named Black. He passed that one as well. So he's passed 2 of them, and his I want to say cohorts, his friends who were with him at the time, those who have been polygraphed have also passed the polygraphs. And I've met a couple of those people as well and talked to them. And when I was in Roswell in 2012, I think I met one of the guys, and I did something on my blog about that, how I talked to him, and how Philip Klass, when he was writing his books about alien abduction and that sort of thing, UFOs, was less than candid in what he was reporting had been said. So we've got to look at all of that information and
your personal opinion. Did you feel like you were being told the truth in those stories?
I am quite ambivalent about it.
Okay.
I
not convincing either way.
Yeah, I really don't know. It seems many of the things that are said about abductions on a whole are pretty preposterous. And yet when you look at what Travis Walton is saying and how that abduction took place, it seems much more plausible than the stories we get today. And there was, I think, 6 people with him, and of those 6 people, no one has really ever come out and says, yeah, we made the whole thing up. Klass's explanation is that they created this story because they were behind on their woodcutting contract, and they were going to lose their contract. A lot of money turns out not to be true because the government who issued the contracts for the harvesting of the trees, the deadlines weren't that strict. I mean, if you were having trouble or something went wrong, you could ask for an extension. They said, yeah, no problem, go ahead. So Klass's explanation on some of that stuff just simply doesn't hold water either. And that's the thing you have to look at when you're studying the UFOs. You know, do you just read the stuff that the true believers write, or do you just read the stuff that the absolute debunkers write? Yeah. And if you do one of those two things, you just don't get a real picture of what's going on in the phenomenon. Yeah. You have to look for the stuff from the people who are writing about it or talking about it or investigating it that are trying to do it from a dispassionate scientific point of view.
Well, if the explanation was alien abduction, which it seems to me that whoever hired them would immediately suspend their contract due to the insanity clause probably in there for one. But do you agree? I mean, does your research or do your belief is that Travis Walton was missing for several days?
Oh, Walton clearly was missing for several days. There's no question about that, and people were looking for him, and he reappeared after several days. Okay. No question about that. And I think the thing that you mentioned is right on target. That if you're sort of defaulting on your contract and you create this cockamamie alien abduction story, they're not going to give you an extension. They're going to fire you because you're crazy. If you needed an extension, you'd come up with a story that was much more plausible about why you can't meet the deadline. And as I say, it appears from what I've learned about all of this that the deadlines weren't that strict. Yeah. They were more guidelines than absolute drop-dead dates. It'd been better if they just said they all came down with bad cases of poison ivy. All right, let's get this question from our Fast Blast from Will in Indiana. Do you believe that any of the UFOs are flown by fallen angels? And I know you must get that question. I don't get it that much, and I don't really think so. I think that the idea, and the opposite side of that is are they demonic? Mm-hmm. And I don't think it fits into those religious parameters at all. Mm-hmm. I think if we're having alien visitation, what I think of is it's kind of like if we were exploring the galaxy around us and found intelligent life on another planet. I think it's kind of how we might conduct our research without really getting involved in their societal problems, but kind of observing from outside, realizing that if you're there to observe, you're kind of screwing up your own study simply by being there. But I've always thought that that's the way it was, that they're observing us from a distance to see how we handle the problems as our society develops. Mm-hmm. And I don't think we handle them very well, because we always seem to end up in war.
The way my mind works or doesn't work, I was actually thinking about today, if aliens were to come down to the United States now and they would get involved with this gender identity thing, I think it would seem pretty ludicrous to them because they would have a lot better understanding of science, and I don't think science bodes well for the whole idea of transgenderism, although a lot of people say that aliens themselves are genderless. What's your comments on that?
We don't really know enough about them to make any comments. And how do we know that they don't have 3 genders or 4? You know, we know how it evolved on our planet. We know how it works on our planet. It doesn't necessarily work that way on another planet.
Yeah, and it also goes to how they probe people, too. That could have a thing with that there, too. So, Doctor, just getting back to finish up with Will's question a little bit more. So if you don't believe, then, that there are any fallen angels driving around these crafts, do you think that the idea that fallen angels exist anyway?
Well, that's a religious question. And, you know, it's like all other questions that we have that are sort of open-ended, where we don't have a definitive answer. It more or less relates to your belief structures and how you interpret things. My PhD dissertation was on how belief structure affected ambiguous stimuli. And what I had done is I had a bunch of photographs of things. I knew what they were, but they were anomalous. You couldn't really tell from them. One of them was a picture of a comet taken by a University of Iowa student where after it had calved, so there were 4 pieces to it looking like it's flying in a diamond formation, but it's a comet. So you want to see, you show the picture to the subject. So what do you think this is? And what you find is if they had a religious background or they were strongly religious, they tended to interpret things that way. If they had a scientific background or they were interested in UFOs, they tended to interpret them in that arena as well. So we don't have enough information to really make that sort of determination, but it really comes down to what you believe and how you interpret those stimuli.
Not to beat a dead gender, but going back, just taking the topic of gender, there is the science of XX chromosomes and XY chromosomes. There's a scientific data that's been around at least for the last 50 years, probably 100 years as far as the scientific determination between male and female. But there are those that believe that is not relevant in the idea of science. So for those folks, their stimuli, it doesn't seem to be based on religious leanings. For those who say there are selective, a person's conscience can select their gender. So if they're not based on science or religious based theology or bent, what do you think those ideas are based on?
Well, we're moving away from the idea of alien visitation and UFOs into other arenas here, where if you're looking at,
I use that as an example of biases, and I think that's what you were talking about. I mean, that's a relevant to today's conversation, but I use that as an example of how biases can affect a person's belief.
Absolutely.
But yet, then to go on though, there is scientific fact that really should not be up to determination whether a person has a religious bent or they have a political or ideological bent. It seems that there has to be a truth on some subjects. Would you not agree with that?
Yes, and that's kind of what I've been saying is you look at it from a dispassionate point of view. You're not looking to prove that UFOs are alien spacecraft, or you're not looking to prove that they are fallen angels or interdimensional beings. You're looking at the evidence and saying, where does this evidence lead us? And at this point, the evidence doesn't lead us to a positive conclusion one way or another, although I think the evidence is drifting more toward alien visitation as opposed to some of these other explanations. But we have to look at the evidence and let it determine where we go and not, as you say, let our personal biases take us in that direction. And that was kind of what I was saying about if you believe strongly in UFOs, you interpret these things as UFOs. And if you believe something else, religious, then you interpret it through that kind of a bias. So you're absolutely right on that point.
How about... and it sounds like you're a little bit sketchy on whether or not there is a such thing as alien abductions. But what about those who have had surgical removal of implants?
There is no scientific evidence that has been presented that proves these implants are of alien manufacture. There's some interesting things that are out there, but an awful lot of times you've got something that doesn't really have anything to prove that it was of alien manufacture. I know, I think it's Daryl Sims has a plastic box with a bunch of these implants that have been removed from people, and they look like the kind of debris that you might pick up in the course of your life. You fall on your hand and you get something embedded in your skin, or you get something embedded in your knee. And you would think, and again, this is my own personal bias, you would think that if you're implanting somebody with some kind of a device, you would want it more up in the shoulders, the neck, or the head area, as opposed to something removed from the bottom of the foot, or from the wrist, or from the arm. So you have to look at all of that. And when they've actually had an opportunity to analyze some of this, there's nothing in those analyses that proves it was of alien manufacture. So, it's the thing that's always bothered me is, let us say that I have a real sample of an alien spacecraft. I mean, it's really an alien spacecraft, and we take it to the laboratory and have it analyzed, and the guy says, it's aluminum. But with that, you do not prove an alien craft. You do not prove alien visitation, even though it came from an alien craft, but it's common aluminum. And back in 1997, when they had the big anniversary in Roswell, there was the story going around that there was a guy who had a piece of craft that had been recovered from Roswell, and they were going to provide us with the chain of custody so you could see who it was. All the evidence had been lined out, so we knew who picked it up. We knew how it got to the hands of the scientist, and the scientist came in and he made his presentation and said the isotopic ratios in this material didn't seem to be natural to Earth, which suggested to him it was extraterrestrial. And then as soon as his presentation was gone, they got him out the back door, and he whizzed away in his automobile, and we're left with this conclusion. But they didn't tell us who had picked it up. They didn't show us anything about the chain of custody. And then when I finally talked to the guy a week or so later, he said, well, it doesn't occur naturally, but the isotopic ratios that we discovered in this is something that has been created on Earth. So in the end, we didn't have something that was definite proof of alien visitation. We had something that was clearly was manufactured, but was not beyond our technology to manufacture it. Mm-hmm. And what we need is something beyond our technology to manufacture to prove that this is something alien.
Were you able? You've done a lot of research on Roswell. Were you able to look at any of the artifacts they claim were from Roswell?
I've seen a lot of them, and not one of them has held up to scrutiny. There was the story where they got something into the museum there, and they took it across the state of New Mexico with a police escort to have it analyzed. I think at the School of Mines there in Socorro, and it turned out to be very fine silver with a trace of gold in it, but it was jeweler's material, and jeweler's scrap is what they said it was. And each time we've had an opportunity to analyze something, whether it's from Roswell or Ubatuba or whatever, it turns out that it is not something beyond our capability to create. Ubatuba was this craft that was seen to explode over Ubatuba, Brazil in 1957, and bits and pieces of this debris was picked off, and it was sent to a magazine reporter who eventually got in touch with Dr. Olivia Fontes, who got it to APRO for them to look at it. And when it was analyzed, they said, well, it was extremely pure magnesium. It was magnesium. It was nearly 100% pure. And at the time, that was a manufacturing process that was very complex and very difficult here on Earth, but it could be done. So it didn't really prove alien visitation. And the other problem was you did not know who picked it up. The chain of custody ended with the magazine reporter. He didn't know where the sample came from because it came to him anonymously. So while we had a very interesting bit of debris, which was eventually treated very cavalierly by everybody, by the way, it did not prove alien visitation. And when I say it was treated cavalierly, it got to APRO headquarters of the Lorenzens, Carl and Jim Lorenzen, who were the directors of APRO, gave a small sample to the Air Force for analysis. And the Air Force wrote back and said, we inadvertently destroyed it in the process of trying to get a spectroscopic analysis. Can you send us another sample? And the Lorenzens said no, because if it's a real alien spacecraft, you're not going to be getting a lot of samples of it. You can't go down to the store and buy it. So they were disinclined to share another sample with the Air Force. Other analysis has been done. I think Peter Sturrock is the last guy who analyzed it. But he had to find the pieces because it changed hands so many times, and people had lost track of it. So it was treated very cavalierly, and he's very interested in it, and the analysis is very interesting of it. But in the end, because of the way it was treated and because of our technology at the time, you just couldn't say that this was impossible to have from a terrestrial manufacturer.
Okay. All right, we have this question from Jade. This is from our moderator out of the live chat. She wants to know, is the alien autopsy fake? Who did it and why?
Alien autopsy is definitely fake. And the guys who did it admitted it was fake. Ray Santilli did it. And the last count I had, they were selling their videotapes of it for $50 a pop, and they'd sold over 1 million of them worldwide.
Wow. Man,
so I think we know what the motive was.
Business. I got to get into that business myself. But you got any
I've
extra
been
alien
thinking
bodies?
about it.
Wow. Man, that pays pretty good. All right,
yes, I think it cost them $100,000 to put the whole thing together, and they did a marvelous job of promoting it in the mid-1990s. But since that time, the guys who built the creatures, they've come forward and said, here's how we did it, and they presented pictures of how it was done. And Ray Santilli has said that, yeah, they made the whole thing up. And then he kind of retracted and said, well, most of what you see in the alien autopsy is fake, but there's a few minutes in there that is the real footage. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, well, that's an incredibly stupid thing to do. If I've got movie footage of a real alien creature, I almost said real live alien creature, but you wouldn't be doing an autopsy on a real live alien creature. But if you've got the footage of that, the last thing you're going to do is put it into a bunch of fake stuff because you've just killed the credibility of it. Mm-hmm. If you've only got 3 minutes of it, you release the 3 minutes and say, here it is, people. You don't surround it with a lot of other crap that you've just made up to make the film a little bit longer. So it's pretty clear to me that the alien autopsy was a hoax.
Here's a question for you. You probably don't want to answer, but if we are talking about famous films, do you think the Patterson Bigfoot film is real?
I do not know enough about Bigfoot to make a claim of either way. I've heard both arguments, whether it's real or it's fake, and both arguments make as much sense to me as anything else. I don't know. I'd like to believe it's real, but I just don't know.
Now, see, that is a topic I can weave into conversation because the innumerable UFO people I've had on the program, there's a whole lot of them that say there's usually Bigfoot activity going on wherever there's UFO sightings.
I have not found that relation being that frequent. I've seen some things where that connection has been made, but not all the time. So it's a connection that has been made infrequently.
Mm-hmm. All right, and a final question before we go to break, Kevin. This is from Chris Wilson. He wants to know, do you believe that there is or has been an underground alien war?
No. I don't find the people talking about that to be very credible.
Oh, okay. Now, would that eliminate Phil Schneider's testimony?
Yes, it would. Although I'll say this, because part of my career in the military, I was provost in the provost marshal's office. I was serving in the Iowa, actually, National Guard provost marshal, mm-hmm. and we got involved in one of those gunfights in an underground base, and we're lucky to escape. No, I just made all that up.
Oh man,
I did. I was with the MPs, but I was not involved in an alien gunfight.
Hey, I love made up stories, man. Hey, I'll make them up myself. Hey, Doctor, we're at the top of the hour. We take about a 5-minute break, but before we do, I'm going to have your website in the background. What can people find there if they go there?
They can find an awful lot of stories on looking at UFOs from all points of view, and in comment sections you get the arguments about why it's real or why it's not. So it's a lot of UFO related stuff, and once in a while I get into other aspects. I've done stuff on Oak Island, the treasure in Canada, and things like that. So I get into some other arenas periodically, but mostly it's UFO stuff from basically all points of view.
Okay. All right, just stay on the line. We're going to turn you down for 5 minutes.
Okay.
All right, everybody, you're watching and/or listening to the Edge television broadcast. On our newsmaker line tonight is, of course, Dr. Kevin Randle. What a fast first hour we had. If you missed any of this exciting broadcast, it'll begin to replay in our main player directly after the show. We'll also extract the high-definition video, put it up on our YouTube channel. We'll also put the interview up in our TuneIn Radio playlist. TuneIn Radio is where you can listen to any program, any any show across any device or any platform. That's TuneIn Radio. You can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook as well. We're going to a 5-minute break. We're going to be right back. And welcome back to the Edge television broadcast. My name is Daniel Lott. If you miss any of the exciting first hour, we're going to begin to replay in our main player directly after the show. We'll put it up on our YouTube channel. Of course, we'll podcast it as well for those of you who like to receive their Edge inoculation every Saturday night that you hear right here in this broadcast. If we haven't had a guest on the program you'd like to see, just drop me a line at edgeam@yahoo.com or click on one of the various links on the website. You can also drop me a line there at the Edge AM. That's our Twitter handle there for you. And that will be it. Next week, we're going to have Steve Olson talking about the planet Nibiru, so stay tuned for that. We've got a lot of exciting shows coming up in May and June. Now, let's go back to our newsmaker line and bring back with us Dr. Kevin Randle. Doctor, welcome back.
Well, thank you very much.
Wow, it was exciting, fast first hour. We talked about so much going there. I want to jump right into one of your books here. Let me bring up the pic of that book so people can see what it looks like. The Government UFO Files, The Conspiracy of Cover Up. Doctor, how is it that you have determined there is a conspiracy? That means there are various people involved, obviously. And what do they do? Where are they getting the information? Where do they collude to cover it up? And what are they doing with that information?
Well, it's obvious that there's a cover-up because you can see any number of cases where their explanations are clearly not true. If you were not covering something up, you'd be telling the truth. And the best example is Roswell. Something fell at Roswell in 1947. The guys in the 509th Bomb Group in Roswell aren't able to identify it. And the next thing you know, it's in Fort Worth at the next higher headquarters. And they're saying, well, it's a weather balloon. See, here we have it right here. Here's a weather balloon. Here's the debris. And then as we investigate it and asked more and more questions about the Roswell case, the Air Force in 1994 did a new investigation, their own investigation, I should say, did their own investigation of what fell. And they said, in 1947, we lied about it. It wasn't a weather balloon. It was, in fact, a weather balloon. They just dressed it up in new clothes and called it Project Mogul, highly classified Project Mogul, so secret the guys working on it in New Mexico didn't even know the name. And as we looked at the documentation and we looked at the evidence, we found out that the guys in New Mexico did know the name because the name Mogul appears in their field notes. The stuff going on in New Mexico wasn't highly classified. They were using off-the-shelf weather balloons and Ray-1 radar targets for their experiments to create a constant level balloon. So that right there is evidence of a cover-up. I mean, they said it was one thing, and then they said it wasn't that thing, it was something else, and we've gone back to it. If we look at the history of the investigations, starting with Project Sign in 1947, actually 1948 to be exact, then Project Grudge, and then Project Blue Book, and we look at what has been said and what has been done, it's clear that they're hiding information. And an Air Force general named Bolander said in 1969 that the really good cases weren't part of the Blue Book system, meaning that they weren't investigated like we were being told they were investigated. The Condon Committee, which was an Air Force-sponsored investigation of UFOs, supposedly an independent investigation, we find letters from the Air Force to Condon and his team members prior to the beginning of the investigation, asking the Air Force is saying, what we would like you to find is there's no threat to national security. The Air Force has done a very good job, and we should conclude the investigation. And the Condon Committee writes back and says, yeah, we can do that. Send us the $500,000 and we'll get right on that. And you have Condon 18 months before the end of the investigation saying, in front of reporters, I don't think there's anything to this, but I'm not supposed to come to that conclusion for another 18 months. What is that but cover up? I mean, it's absolutely clear that the Air Force was conspiring with the University of Colorado and Condon to end the Project Blue Book, and they told them exactly what they wanted to the conclusions to be. And when Blue Book ended, that's exactly what the conclusions were that they got. They actually explained a UFO sighting as a natural phenomenon so rare it had never been seen before or since. to me, there's something of scientific value to investigate. If you've got a natural phenomenon that rare, maybe we ought to try to determine what it was. But that was the explanation of the Condon Committee. What kind of explanation is that? So we can look at this whole history, and we can see it's either massive incompetence or somebody is directing the operation to take us in directions they want us to go. Right. And you look at the preposterous explanation, and you look at what they have said. Ed Ruppelt, who was the chief of Project Blue Book for a while, said that they never used the term flying saucer except in a derogatory fashion, like, well, you don't believe in those flying saucers, do you? As a way of kind of belittling people that might accept the reality that there's alien visitation.
So who in the government would you think, or what organization is in charge of the disinformation, the denial, the cover-up conspiracy?
Well, for a while, apparently it was the Air Force. Starting with the Army Air Forces back in 1947, and it was clear that Project Blue Book was part of that disinformation campaign. And if you look at the attitudes of the men who ran the investigation after Ruppelt specifically, you see that they were clearly anti-saucer, clearly anti-alien visitation. They were clearly in the mundane. And it goes right up to Hector Quintanilla, who was the last chief of Project Blue Book, who he joined it as a captain. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm Joe Air Force officer. I'm looking to be a general at some point. And suddenly I'm given the job of running Project Blue Book. Talk about a dead-end job. I realize my career is now over, so I'd be a little bit annoyed. And you can see in Quintanilla's attitude, he wrote a book about his experiences with Blue Book, and you can see that he is really annoyed about being given that assignment. They did seem to promote him with his peers. I mean, he joined it as a captain. They promoted him to major. They promoted him to lieutenant colonel, and then he retired. And I know an awful lot of Air Force officers who followed that same progression, that their career went very well, and they retired as lieutenant colonels. Nothing wrong with that. But this specific job is one that you got because you weren't going anywhere.
Kevin, are you still in touch with any active servicemen?
Oh, absolutely.
Has there been any perceived or real culling of generals or any other level of military that seems to be correlating with whether or not they support Obama's directives?
Not that I'm aware of. I think the vast majority of the officers and top NCOs in the military are professionals, and they realize that President Obama is the commander-in-chief, and his orders must be obeyed by law unless they happen to be unlawful orders. And there's really nothing that he has done that would be categorized as an unlawful order. So I haven't seen anything like that. I know that when Bill Clinton was elected, there was a similar attitude from, I guess, the civilian world, but I never really saw the officers or the senior NCOs. They might express privately a dissatisfaction with the commander-in-chief, but they would not do it publicly because that would be unprofessional. And we all realize that there is a civilian authority that is at the top of the chain of command. Once you get to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who is a top officer in the military, then you get into the civilians, secretaries of the Army and the Air Force and the Navy, and then you get to the Department of Defense, and then up to the President of the United States. So the very top of the command structure is all civilians. And I haven't really seen anybody refuse to do anything that is a lawful order.
Okay. All right. We have this question from Jade, our moderator. What do you believe is the most credible alien craft sighting?
I think one of the best is Levelland, Texas, from November of 1957. And I say that because you have witnesses at least 13 separate locations reporting this craft independently. It's interacting with the environment, which means there's electromagnetic effects. It's stalling car engines. It's dimming headlights. It's filling radios with static. You've got law enforcement involved. You have the sheriff's office involved. You've got the fire marshal's office involved with seeing this thing. You've got then you see the public relations machine kick in with the Air Force saying, well, there weren't that many witnesses. There were only 3 witnesses to the actual craft, and Don Kehoe at the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena saying, no, there were 9, and both these guys were wrong. It was, in fact, at 13 locations, and you can see that in the Air Force files. You've got people from college students who saw it to Latinos seeing it, reporting it. The first who reported was a guy named Pedro Saucedo, who they kind of blew off because he was Hispanic. And the interesting thing, he was a Korean War veteran. I think that should have been at the top of the list. He was a veteran of the Korean War, and we should give him some respect for that. He was the first to report it, but they didn't like him because his name was Saucito, which is awfully close to saucer. And so there was some suggestion, there was some problems with that, but he seemed to be a very credible witness. Not a highly educated man, but a hardworking man and a very good man to have seen that. You've got college students. You have other people seeing it. And they're reporting this thing. They're calling the Levelland Sheriff's Office, talking to him about it until the sheriff goes out to take a look around. But the point is, they're calling in. There's no TV broadcast about this. There's no radio broadcast about it. These people are calling the Levelland Sheriff's Office because they're seeing this thing independently of one another. And that's very credible. And then just an hour or 2 later, you have a sighting at White Sands Missile Range by a couple of military policemen seeing the thing that was blown off as the moon or Venus. And the thing apparently landed in front of one of the teams within 100 yards of where they were. And I talked to one of the guys, Glenn Toy, about this to get his point of view. And then you can see how the Air Force didn't really investigate that sighting very carefully either. So the Levelland from 1957, I think, is a very good series of sightings. Mm-hmm. Some of the Lubbock, Texas stuff is very interesting, especially the photographs. You've got the Lonnie Zamora sighting from Socorro, New Mexico in April of 1964 that is very, very good. But here's the interesting thing. It seems as we move forward in time, the sightings are not nearly as robust and not nearly as exciting as they were in the past. And Carl Flock and I talked about this a couple of times, wondering if maybe the alien creatures who might be visiting Earth have gathered their information and now they've gone home to analyze it before they send the next expedition here to gather additional information.
Kevin, what about the Rendlesham Forest?
Very good sighting. I've talked to a number of those guys. I know them, John Burroughs and Jim Peniston. I know them well. I've looked at the information they have. A very good series of sightings. There is some confusion about the number of days that it took place, but you've got documentation in the form of Colonel Halt's tape. You've got the letter that Halt wrote about this, so you've documented some of this stuff going on. So that's a very good sighting, and I'm glad you brought it up because that moves us to 1980.
Well, did you wasn't it one of those that wrote a book with X's and O's or?
That was Jim Peniston who.
Did you see that?
Yes, Nick Pope with John Burroughs and Jim Peniston had put a book out about Rendlesham Forest, and in the back of the book you can see the binary code that he wrote out after this event. Mm-hmm. So that's a very interesting case. I don't think the skeptic explanation works very well, saying that it was the lights from the lighthouse seen through the bare trees at Christmas time, because I'm thinking that if that was the solution, then after they went out 2 or 3 times and realized this thing is visiting every night, they would try to trace the source of the light and find that it's a lighthouse. So the fact that they didn't see it after the 2 nights of the case suggests that the mundane explanation of the lighthouse just doesn't work.
All right. And then we have this question from Put Y'all Away First out of the live chat. Have you personally seen UFOs?
Well, I used to answer the question in the negative simply because it was easier. But back in the old days when I lived in Denver, a friend of mine and I would go to the Denver UFO Society meetings on, I think it was the 3rd Friday night of the month, and they held a get-together, not really a symposium or anything, down near Castle Rock, and we were all sitting around out in the ranch at the fire late at night, late at night, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, and we watched a light go overhead, just a light, looks like a star basically, going overhead, flashed once. Somebody said, oh, they're signaling us, and then it continued on, but it was in a polar orbit, and my friend and I, we tried to find out if there was any satellites in a polar orbit at that time that we would have seen on that night, and there didn't seem to be. So we saw this light in the sky, basically. So that's not much of a UFO story.
Okay, I tell you what, then let's move on to 2016. Colt 45 has this question for you, Kevin. It says, what do you think about the Army Chief of Staff Miley this month telling the ROTC members their anniversary celebration they would have to deal with hybrid armies, little green men, and tribes?
Douglas MacArthur said essentially the same thing back in 1964, that the next real war would be an interstellar war, interplanetary war with aliens. So, I mean, this sort of thing sort of comes up. And I know that what the military does is they create scenarios, and then they kind of try to figure out how they would respond to those very scenarios. And the thing that always struck me as odd was back in the 1930s, when they were running some of these scenarios, it always started with Orange attacking the fleet at Pearl Harbor. And Orange, of course, was the Japanese. So they were running scenarios in the 1930s with a surprise attack at Pearl Harbor. And then, of course, they get clobbered in 1941. The problem is, if anybody who has studied this sort of thing realizes that if you're an alien invader, all you do is stand out in space and throw rocks at us, meaning, just push asteroids down. You don't have to have weapons. This destructive power of an asteroid falling into our atmosphere. So I'm not sure exactly what the thinking was on that, but I've heard these sorts of things from very high-ranking military officers in the past, and it's always kind of exciting to think about.
All right, we have this question from Baby Wolf out of the UK, staying up very, very late to watch the program. She asked this question to you, Kevin. It says, are you an atheist, as you don't come across all God mad like some guests?
No, I'm not an atheist. Crying out loud. What would that have to do with the study of UFOs anyway? No, I'm not an atheist.
Okay,
I'm actually an Episcopalian, if you want to know.
All right.
Although, I will say this, when you are deploying overseas, they ask you your religious affiliation. And I think there was at one time, 150,000 soldiers in Iraq, and like 5,000 has claimed Jedi as their religion.
Well, I always thought it was. I don't know.
These are not the droids you're looking for.
Well, yeah, just a kind of the wave of the hand, and that kind of goes with some people and their testimonies about UFOs. They want to use a sleight of hand, but it sounds to me like you're pretty rock steady on whether or not there is enough evidence to legitimize a sighting or not. And it does seem like the sightings worldwide, there are so many, and there's so many pics on the internet, as you're well aware. Of the pictures on the internet of what's purported to be UFOs, what percentage would you think is just Photoshop?
99.99%. In fact, I did a thing on my blog about this, about where are the good UFO pictures? Because I would think with all the cameras out there, everybody's got a cell phone, and you would think that you would have a photograph of this UFO taken from multiple locations by multiple independent witnesses, which would allow you to triangulate it, get a size, get a speed, and all kinds of good information if you had pictures taken from multiple locations. And we just don't have anything like that. And somebody pointed out in the comments section, well, the problem is everybody's looking down at their cell phone. They're not looking up at the sky to see the UFO. So,
okay.
Which may have something to do with it. I don't know, but I think that we need to look at the evidence and see where the evidence takes us, and that's what we really want to do. But the photographs, especially in today's environment, I mean, a 10-year-old kid with a computer can create just a really spectacular piece of video, and it's very difficult to tell whether or not it's been created by Photoshop or computer-generated images or any of that sort of thing, and what might be real out there. So, periodically you can figure it out and say, well, the shadows don't match up, or this is slightly wrong, or the pixelation is not right around the object as it is in the rest of the sky, and things like that. But it's very difficult sometimes to tell what has been faked and what is real. Yeah,
I have an absolutely real video somebody sent me of a cow abduction. I'm going to play that right now. I mean, this is absolutely real. cows out in the pasture, and this UFO parks right above him and zaps him up. I mean, that's probably real, isn't it?
Well, back in 1897, when we were talking about the big airship scare of the airship flying over the United States, Alexander Hamilton, and I don't know if he's a relation to the Alexander Hamilton. I do know that a grandson of Alexander Hamilton was killed at the Battle of Washita under George Custer, which is irrelevant to anything, but Alexander Hamilton talked about a calf napping from his corral back in 1897. So it just shows us that a lot of the UFO phenomena repeats itself as the years go by.
Okay. Dr. Kevin Randle, you are an alien. You're flying from Alpha Centauri. You just got here. What do you want?
I have always thought that once we've been discovered, what we got is a whole bunch of graduate students trying to get their PhDs by studying the crazy people on Earth. It's a gathering of information. It's much what we would do in a similar circumstances, which is we send guys to the moon, and what do? They pick up 900 pounds of rocks. We send robotic explorers to Mars and doing sort of the same thing, looking at the composition of the planet's surface and looking for signs of life, signs of water, and that sort of thing, because that's what interests us. And I would think that if I was an alien race coming to Earth, I would be interested in the social dynamic of the creatures who are running around loose on Earth. I would be interested in how their society evolves. And as we master technology, do we put it to good use, or are we just really screwing things up? Mm-hmm. But the other thing you have to remember is we don't really know how an alien would think. We suspect because they would be sentient beings, they would do some of the same things we do, but we simply do not know. They might have evolved on a planet with a population that is pretty much passive, pretty much pacifistic in their nature. So the motivations that we would have aren't necessarily the motivations they would have.
Have you been able to verify any jets that have tried to intercept UFOs?
If you go back to 1947, there are newspaper articles on the July 4th weekend of 1947, just prior to the announcement at Roswell, that a number of aircraft were airborne searching for UFOs. And there's other times that orders had gone out. The Washington Nationals in 1952, there were a number of times that the UFOs were attempted to be intercepted. And in one case, they actually intercepted. I was talking to Dewey Fournet, who was the Air Force liaison officer at the Pentagon, and then Al Chop, who was a civilian, the civilian who ran the UFO desk at the Pentagon in 1952, and they were at the Washington National Airport on one of the nights when the UFOs were being seen on the radar and all of that stuff was going on, and talked to me about what they called a really hairy incident where the pilot was surrounded by these lights for a number of times until he kind of broke off the intercept and went off in a different direction. But I mean, here's the point. The point is simply, yes, there are documentable instances where intercepts have been attempted.
And they can never seem to get there.
They have come close. Sometimes it looks like the UFOs are kind of playing with our aircraft. If we fire on them, and there's any number of instances where that has happened. I talked to a pilot from the Peruvian Air Force who actually fired at a UFO, and I asked him specifically, did you hit it? And he said, yes, but it had no effect on it, and then it disappeared. And I asked that question because there had been another story out that the Chilean Air Force had attempted to intercept something, and they fired missiles at it, hit it, and it didn't do any damage. And I actually got a hold of the report and it said it fired missiles without effect, which is certainly different than hitting it. Mm-hmm. So that's why I asked him specifically if he'd hit it. So yes, there have been any number of intercepts where they've been fired on, and their capabilities. It would be kind of like if we were flying the F-22 back during World War II. There's really not a whole lot that they could do to bring down that aircraft. They couldn't spot it on their radars. It outrun anything that they had. The electronics and the missiles would be incredible. They would lose in all the dogfights. It would be just an incredible, or even worse, the F-22 back in World War I with the bi-wing airplanes. Our technology is so far superior that there's nothing we can do.
What do you think about the so-called battle for Los Angeles right around World War II?
Boy, that's a tough one, and I say that because I know there's that picture that seemed to show kind of an object in the searchlights, but there's also evidence that picture had been retouched by the newspaper so that they could print it and it would be visible in the newspaper. The technology for printing newspapers and pictures back that long ago wasn't as great as it is today when you get the really fine detail and all that, and they tended to touch up pictures so they would look better. So there's some discussion about that, but the other thing is, they say, well, maybe it was a weather balloon, and I can't believe you'd expend 1,500 rounds and not hit the thing. And if you hit it with one round, the balloon's going to deflate like instantaneously.
Where do those rounds come down at?
They fall back to Earth.
Well, yeah.
And that's the other thing. When we were in Iraq, we were always warned about the celebratory gunfire of the Iraqis because the bullets come back down. Mm-hmm. And we've had soldiers injured by those. And I know that in some of the Mythbusters did a thing about if you fired a round straight up, would it come down and possibly kill you? And they determined that it would fall at the terminal velocity and it wouldn't have the power to penetrate and hurt you badly. But when you're doing the celebratory gunfire, you're not firing straight up, so you're kind of doing what I would think of as indirect fire. So people have been killed by firing rounds. And I think in the Battle of Los Angeles, I think 6 people died. I think 3 by heart attack and 3 by falling ordnance. So, that stuff comes back down and can be deadly.
All right. And what's your take on the Norway spiral?
I'm not familiar with that one.
Okay. And then Chris Wilson wants to know, do you have any opinion on orbs and chemtrails?
Well, orbs, I think that's more of an artifact of the digital camera than it is anything else. And I again, hesitate to mention, but in Iraq, we were having a meeting and I was taking some pictures of it. When I got the pictures at it's indoors and there were all kinds of orbs in the pictures, and it's really a artificial construct from the way the digital cameras work. Mm-hmm. Chemtrails I haven't done a lot with. I'm kind of of the opinion that there really is anything nefarious behind the chemtrails. So, I know other people think that it's much more dangerous than that. I just haven't seen the evidence suggesting it's really dangerous. Mm-hmm. Clearly there's trails out there. I mean, there's photographs of them. So
we won't linger on this question, but you did mention you're an Episcopalian. Has all your research and your the writing of the books and intelligence you've had and the people you've talked to, does that support or does it undermine in any way your faith in that religion?
No. And
they peacefully coexist?
I've asked a number of priests about that too, because I always thought that was an interesting question. How does religious factor into that? And their attitude has always been that there is no problem with that sort of thing. I think even the Catholic Church kind of endorses the idea of other people on other worlds. So I don't think that really affects the religious aspect of it at all. Hasn't really factored into my investigations one way or another.
So do you see a time when there will be contact?
Absolutely. But I don't, and we talk about disclosure and how disclosure is coming. And I think, I just read something the other day that, by the end of the Obama administration, he's going to announce that the aliens are here and have been, before he leaves office. But we've heard all this before, this disclosure, and there's no motivation for the government to disclose anything they know at this point. In fact, it might be, not anything but beneficial for them to do it simply because of the reaction of the people. And I don't mean people getting frightened and rioting in the streets or anything like that, but just kind of the attitude, well, here's just something else the government lied to us about. Mm-hmm. The only way I see disclosure happening is the aliens finally decide to land and announce their presence. Mm-hmm. And at that point, that's out of the hands of the government.
Do you think they see the United States as the leader of this planet, or would they been unbiased visitors, would they see something else, somebody else they'd like to talk to? Who do they want? Who do they want to reveal themselves to first?
I don't know. I would think that if you're looking at the world, I mean, you could look at Mexico City and say, here is a very modern urban city of a huge population, and on the other hand, you see some of the poverty around Mexico City. And you can do that anywhere in the world. I would think that Japan would seem to be a very technologically advanced society. Some of the things we see out of China show they're very technologically advanced. Europe, of course, technologically advanced. Let's not leave out the Canadians. Don't want them to get mad at me. Mm-hmm. So, I think if you were looking at it as an outside observer and not really attuned to the societal influences, that you could look at any of these areas and think of them as sort of the leader in the world, or they might not even think in terms of leaders of the world. Where is the most industrially advanced? Where is the most intellectually advanced? Let's go to those places to talk to them. So if I was an alien creature, I would like to believe that the United States is, of course, the leader of the world, but that's my American bias. Mm-hmm. But I think that if you looked at the planet as a whole, you'd find a lot of places that you could deem the leader of the planet.
They certainly wouldn't go to the places where people getting their heads hacked off. All right, we have this question for you. It says, Kevin, if you were offered the opportunity to take a ride on a true alien spacecraft, would you do it?
Absolutely. I'm gone. I'm history. I'm taking my camera and I'm getting photographs.
Wow.
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. What would be the downside? Other than nobody would believe you and they'd say, well, you faked the photographs. But yes, in fact, not long ago, and I did a piece on my blog about this, some woman was on a radio program claiming that we who had served in Iraq actually had been involved in fighting aliens on Mars. And when we returned home, we were all brainwashed to believe that we'd been in the Middle East. So apparently I've already been aboard a flying saucer and been to Mars. So there you go.
Well, I thought I saw you on Moon Base when I had a telescope and I was looking at the moon bases, and I thought I saw you there. All right, we have this question from John in Pennsylvania. A doctor says, have you heard of Vietnam stories of the military shooting ordinances at UFOs and the UFOs redirecting the ordinances back to them?
No. I will tell you, though, that had a craft of some kind been anywhere where we were, we would have fired on it. I might not have. I might have tried to stop them from doing it, but I know we would fire it on it, figuring that if it's coming at us and it's not one of ours, it's the enemy, and we're going to shoot at it. So you have to look at the environment. I mean, you're in a combat situation. If you cannot identify this thing coming at you, it's clearly the enemy, and it needs to be engaged. Mm-hmm. I do not know of any story. Well, I've heard stories, but I don't find them credible. I've heard some stories about us firing at UFOs, but I don't see a lot of good evidence for it. So that's kind of where we are.
I mean, if you're an advanced civilization coming down, you see, them shooting these things at you. You'd think that they're pretty barbaric. I don't know why you'd want to continue to come down to this planet like that.
Well, I think the other side is if your technology is far enough advanced, what we would be firing at them probably wouldn't be effective. And there are any number of stories, especially the Foo Fighters during World War II, of our aircraft, and probably the Germans and the Japanese as well. I mean, all sides of the war engaging these things. And I've seen the stories where they said, well, we fired at this light and the seemed to absorb the ammunition, and we fired at it and it bounced off. So there's a lot of those kind of stories running around as well. I don't really know of anything in Vietnam, but you've got to remember that I was a warrant officer helicopter pilot, and so I wasn't taken in to all the upper level intelligence that was floating around. So if somebody had done that, I probably wouldn't have been aware of it anyway. When I was a battalion intelligence officer in Iraq, I had access through the SIPRNet of all kinds of stuff, and I didn't see anything there. I was always kind of looking for UFO stuff, but I never saw anything.
All right. And here's a question for you. Do you think that these aliens in Earth history have been misrepresented or believed to be the gods that we see?
I would think that if I was in a primitive society and somebody descended from the heavens, however they might have descended, whether it was beaming down a la Star Trek or landing in some kind of a fiery chariot, I would believe that they were the gods, especially when they showed me their technology. I think it's Arthur C. Clarke who said that any technology sufficiently advanced will look like magic to those who are not aware of it. Mm-hmm. And think of what we can do today. I was just outside the other day and I pushed my garage door open. I said, 100 years ago, people would wonder what I was able to do. How did I make that door go up and down? And all I did was push a button in my hand, and they wouldn't have known the secret to it. So if you've got a technology sufficiently advanced, and of course even if today if they're landing, I think their technology would look like magic to us. So I can see that if there was interaction between humans and alien creatures in our distant past, that they would think of them as gods.
Mm-hmm. Do you think they were aware of Jesus' birth, and maybe they said among themselves, finally somebody's going to bring peace to this planet?
I don't know. I did read a science fiction story which was kind of interesting a long, long time ago, and I do not remember the name or the author. But the idea was it was an Earthman with a spaceship, and he was chasing the Jesus character through the cosmos, trying to catch up to him to see who he really was and what was really going on. Which is kind of an intriguing story. The problem there is, if you're talking about Jesus's philosophy of peace, clearly it didn't take. You just need to look around the world. The Christianity is much more beneficial than it was. At one time, they're doing crusades. They're burning people at the stakes if they didn't convert and that sort of thing. But all of that is in the distance past. So the Christian philosophy, I think, is a wonderful philosophy, especially when you're talking about peace and doing the right thing, and all of that is a wonderful philosophy. But unfortunately, it's not a worldwide philosophy, and we see it violated all the time.
So Episcopalians don't have much respect for the Jesus character, eh?
Episcopalians?
Yes.
Why would we not have respect for Jesus?
What? Isn't that what you just said?
No. I thought you said aliens. I was looking at it from an alien point of view, not from an Episcopalian point of view or a religious point of view. I'm looking at it. Would the aliens see that? And Jesus' teachings are wonderful examples of how we should live. We as a society throughout the world has not embraced it.
Mm-hmm. Well, the aliens, if they had a better way for humans to live, they certainly haven't revealed it. And that goes to the question for many, that if they're here, why don't they, they see the pollution, the Fukushima, the contamination, the wars. They're not bringing any answers to us. So do you think they have that classic Star Trek-ish non-interference pact?
I was going to say prime directive. Observe but don't interfere. Of course, in Star Trek, they were always interfering.
Yes, and but it usually turned out well, though, didn't it?
Well, we're not supposed to interfere, but this one time, we got to do something this one time. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. Again, we're trying to figure out what an alien creature would do and how he would relate and what he would see. Mm-hmm. And it may be that they're just here to watch our evolution, see how we handle the problems we've created for ourselves, and don't want to interfere. Mm-hmm. I just see no evidence that they're bothering to try to fix anything at all. Yeah. They're just watching us kind of rush toward Armageddon.
Mm-hmm. All right, we have this question from Will. He wants to know, do you think that any of these UFOs come from a hollow Earth?
No.
And that brings me... Go ahead.
I did a science fiction book called Land of the North, and the idea, it was set right after World War I, because I didn't want Google Earth up there looking for the entrance to the hollow Earth. And so I postulated a society inside the Earth in that fashion. But I think with our satellite surveys and everything going on, had there been an opening that allowed access to the hollow Earth, that we would have discovered it by now. So I think that that ship's pretty well sailed.
But Google has blacked out certain areas. You think those are just secure areas for the military?
I don't have a clue why they would black things out. Because, I mean, if you remember back in the 90s, we couldn't get good American satellite photographs of Area 51, but everybody was getting them from the Russians. So, because the Russian satellites were photographing that as well.
What about the phenomena of USOs, underwater submerged objects?
Well, there's another fine case, the Shag Harbor UFO crash from 1968, where the thing was seen to dive into the water. I always think of that more of as an emergency landing than an actual crash. But if, maneuvering through the ocean is somewhat akin to maneuvering through space. It's just a denser medium that you have to maneuver through. I mean, space is filled with all kinds of stuff. I know when I was talking to James Van Allen, one of the things he always said about the idea of interstellar travel is he couldn't figure out how they would shield the crew from the radiation, because as you move toward relativistic speeds through space, you've got all this hydrogen out there that would tend to bombard the aircraft or the spacecraft, and the radiation would become intolerable. So I think that if you can maneuver through interstellar space, that you would be able to maneuver through a much more dense medium such as the water.
Is it likely that they're hiding there?
If I was an alien race and I wanted to hide somewhere where we wouldn't be discovered easily, that's where I'd hide. I mean, you have to look at it that way. If you have any kind of base on land, it's much easier for us to find it than if you're hidden in some of the depths of the ocean, okay. Especially if nobody's looking for you.
And right, and it'd have to be at the exact spot, too, and that could be precarious. All right, here's a question from Peter in Australia. He wants to know, are you familiar with Ed Grimsley and his Skywatch events?
No, not really.
I
was going to say hi to my Australian friends. I was in Australia in 1969, and I enjoyed myself immensely.
All right.
Thought it was a wonderful country.
There you go, Peter. Yeah, Ed Grimsley, I believe what he does, but I think it's for a fee. He invites people to come out to the desert with night vision goggles, and then they look up and they frequently say they see UFOs. And have you ever heard of people saying that you have clearer vision of UFO activity with night vision goggles?
Yes, I have heard that.
Have you tried it?
No. My experience with night vision goggles has been limited. My experience with a starlight scope is somewhat more robust, but I never saw anything through the night vision apparatus that would suggest to me that it was of alien nature.
So what do you think that in fact, you mentioned about possibility of disclosure within the Obama administration, but I think even Hillary Clinton chimed in on that. But it seems to be more of a niche thing. I want to, get some of the UFO believer votes, and so I'm going to throw that out there. But I don't see any intention whatsoever of our government coming clean. So it sounds like before there's disclosure, it's the aliens are going to have to do it themselves without the assistance of our government.
Well, if you go back and remember, Bill Clinton was going to do the same thing, and he didn't do it. I think Jimmy Carter was going to do it. And so now we're back into the 1970s with these claims that we're going to look into this UFO thing and talk about it. Bill Clinton apparently didn't get anywhere. They told him there was nothing to it, and he believed them. I don't know what Hillary Clinton, if she was elected, she would do any differently, or what information she would get that Bill couldn't have gotten when he was president. So I'm not sure of the value of the UFO vote. I'm just not sure that would be the deciding factor for me to vote for Hillary or Donald. Whether or not she's going to disclose the presence of UFOs is not going to be the deciding factor in my vote. Well,
it seems that if Bernie got it and he had disclosure, he would offer free rides on the UFO craft. If Donald Trump got it, he would charge at the door.
And that's probably a better way of doing it, charging at the door and put some money back into the coffer so my income taxes would go down. Bernie Sanders, he's going to give free stuff to everybody but me, apparently, as near as I can figure. So,
well, I'm trying to trade him. I want my mortgage paid off instead of education, free education. I was wondering if I could trade him in for that. What do you think? He'd let me do it?
I don't know. I was going to say that, I've got a mortgage on my house and I had to pay for my own college. So how about this? If you're going to pay for college for these people, how about paying off my mortgage for me? Because it'd be about the same.
Or you could retro pay you for what you paid into it. There's a lot of ways to do this.
That one could be quite expensive.
There's a lot of ways to do this thing, man. A lot of ways to go free. So what is if there is disclosure? Do you see how do you see the public reacting to that?
I think in today's environment, it's not going to be an over. There might be a momentary, oh my God, we just, there's aliens out there. And then they think, this has been going on for like 70 years. And it's not affected my life any way at all. Why should I be concerned about it? I think there would be that kind of a reaction. It would be just sort of a stunned silence for a while. And then it was, so what? I can't see people rioting the streets. I can't see people being overly frightened. The only way you would frighten people is, there's aliens and they're about to launch the invasion. And we're pretty well screwed on that one. But I just can't see that being, I just can't see it being that disruptive. I just think it would be something that people would take in stride at this point. I mean, look at our television, our movies, and all of that sort of thing. We've dealt with this question since actually before there were talking movies with alien creatures coming down. There's all kinds of stories about that. Sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's good. Independence Day wasn't particularly good, but we did win. In other cases, it was just sort of a benign contact. So I think that there wouldn't be a terrible reaction.
So you think the public has been prepared through the movies to accept
we've become much more sophisticated, I think. And through that sophistication, we've learned to be much more tolerant of those that aren't like us. And I think that would be one of the things to do, especially if they kind of landed and there was like a group of 3 or 4 of them. And what kind of threat does that really pose to us? And I think that's all part of the whole thing. So I think we would realize it's probably much more benign than the movies sometimes show us to be, but I think we're kind of exposed to that. We've got probes on Mars. We've sent probes to Venus. Of course, it melted. We've sent probes into the atmosphere of Jupiter to be crushed. We've got the Voyager outside the confines of the solar system finally after all these years. It's still 87,000 years away from the closest star, but it's out there doing the best it can on such short notice. Mm-hmm. And I think that, all of that is kind of created this idea of an interstellar community amongst us, and we'll take it in stride.
Yeah, you might not have done this, but I'll just ask this question anyway. Is there any historical document that you know of that suggests in a future date there would be some sort of contact-like time with some from the stars?
There's been a number of studies about that, and what they've usually found is that when a technological superior civilization comes in contact with a technologically inferior civilization, the technologically inferior civilization ceases to exist. The mere introduction of the technology changes society radically. One of the best examples in anthropology is an anthropologist studying a primitive tribe, and he took with him a number of steel axes to use as bribes to get people to talk to him and interact with him. And what he did by giving those things out, he didn't realize he was undercutting the society, because in that society, to get an axe, and it was a stone axe, so it was not nearly as good as a steel axe, you had to go through a process to borrow it from one of the elders of the tribe. Now he's handing out steel axes, so he's undercutting the societal strings because of what he's done unintentionally, but it's just one of those things. The technologically inferior civilization is now changing simply by the introduction of that steel axe. So there's been a number of studies that suggest that's what's going to happen. And you don't need conquest. You don't need a war. You just need the introduction of that technology.
Do you think there's any truth to the idea some have that Earth was seeded either by the animals or the humans?
No, I think if it was seeded, it was probably accidental. I don't think it was any intentional thing to do. Well, of course, we can go back to Star Trek and their Genesis project, which was creating that sort of a thing on planets in the Goldilocks zone. So, but I think that the life here was designated for here.
So, Kevin, do you consider yourself a Star Trek fan?
I like Star Trek.
Well, answer me this question: What was it between Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner? They died.
Well, they were very good friends.
Yeah.
And then Shatner was doing a documentary, a Star Trek documentary of some kind in around 2005, 2006. And he asked Leonard Nimoy to participate, and Leonard Nimoy didn't want to do it. So one of his cameramen had gone to a Star Trek convention and surreptitiously filmed Leonard Nimoy and put him in the documentary, and that really annoyed Leonard Nimoy. So I think that was the basis for the falling out, which I think is sort of trivial, but then I think of some of the relationships I've had with people and the things that have come between us and think, well, yeah, it's pretty trivial. So, but that was what the falling out was. Prior to that, they were very good friends, and you saw Leonard Nimoy show up on what's his face's Kirk's program, T.J. Hooker. And they interacted and there was actually, I watched one of those shows not too long ago on one of those retro channels, and it was really horrid. But I watched it because Leonard Nimoy was on there with Shatner.
Well, I'll tell you what, that's a philosophical thing right there. People should take a lesson, and that is be sure that they don't hate somebody on their way out. Make sure that those things are fixed.
Yes, very good, yes.
All right. Dr. Kevin Randle, I appreciate you coming on the Edge Television broadcast. I have your one of your favorite books, Government UFO Files, The Conspiracy Cover Up. Now, you've got a new book coming out, too, as well, I understand.
I have a book that is due to hit Amazon as a Kindle or electronic book on July 16th, and it's called Roswell in the 21st Century. And what I did was treat Roswell as a cold case file and go back through all the evidence that I had accumulated and what I could find and tried to look at it with dispassionate eyes and fresh eyes, and came up with some interesting findings. And I'm pretty sure this book is going to annoy everybody.
All right. You're an equal opportunity annoyer.
Yes.
All right.
Absolutely.
I like that. I'm an equal opportunity offender, so, man, we're getting along really well.
Yes, we are.
Dr. Randle, I appreciate you coming on the Edge Television broadcast. Can we have you on again sometime?
Absolutely. You know where I am. You got my Skype address, so sure.
All right. I appreciate you coming on. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening.
Good night.
All right, everybody. It was Dr. Kevin Randle. If you miss any of this exciting broadcast, it will begin to replay in our main player shortly after the show here. And then we'll also take the high-definition video, put it up in our YouTube channel. We'll also extract the audio and put it in our TuneIn radio platform as well. Next week, Steve Olson's going to be with us talking about the planet Nibiru. Can't miss that program. And then all of our shows, of course, are up on our YouTube channel. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter or Facebook, friend me, and follow some of my pontifications there as well. Thanks, everyone, for the great questions tonight, for the good doctor. That's going to be a wrap. And Chris Wilson says, Daniel, thank you for the show. Looking in the live chat. Eddie Wilson says, good show. Tony in Louisiana says, great show. Thanks, Daniel and Jade. Jade, the integral part of the program, of course. Sugarfoot says, great show, Daniel. Good night, Edgies. And obviously we had Grandma come back in, but it was almost like everybody's doing a Snoopy dance when Grandma came back into the live chat, so that was kind of fun. Kentucky Girl says, thank you, Daniel. Any other kudos for Jade out there? Just put them on in that live chat because I think she's still there. There you go. Jade says, thank you all for a great interaction. Love the Edge chat, man. I'll tell you what, there's chats out there, but there is no chat out there like the Edge chat. So we appreciate that. James West says, thank you, Daniel and Jade. God bless. And then Sugarfoot got a big yay there for Grandma. And Raul says, the show is over. I lost the signal. Dreamwalker says, great job, Daniel. And then there's Kentucky Girl saying, everybody, please come back next week. Baby Wolf from the UK says, good night from the UK, with a big hug for everybody in the live chat. Got a lot of blessings going on. Hey, by the way, I'm still getting interactions from the exorcism show we had a few weeks ago. Evidently, that was a well-needed show out there for some folks, and maybe even myself. Who knows? All right, that's be a wrap for the program. The King Dollar says, blessings on. Cleet says, love you, Jade. Daniel Ott for the Edge. Bye-bye.